to part 2 of our Cosplay Stitch and Seam episode on gender and cosplay. I'm Pannon and...
I'm David.
Nice! So David's going to be with us today. Mercedes couldn't make it. She had some family stuff because, darn it, it's the holidays.
It's the holidays. It's the worst time to plan to do anything.
But just a few announcements before we get too far into the meat of the episode, I guess.
Yes.
We have Level Up Expo, which Mercedes will be at this February. I'll be at SakuraCon coming up this spring. It's always Easter weekend. It's always Easter weekend. And I'll actually be judging the masquerade there. So I am excited to see all your costumes. And we are a finalist for Voice of the West here in Utah. It's done by the Utah Podcast Committee. Utah Podcast
I believe that's right.
Committee. So yeah, look forward to more news on that in May or June, coming out this next year. If you guys have any ideas for episodes, if you want to share a cosplay horror story, or if you just want to share an uplifting, fun cosplay story, you can feel free to message us. We take emails via Gmail. I did not get into like my usual spiel here. Our email is cosplaystitchandseam@gmail.com or
you can go to our website, cosplaystitchandseam.com, and there is a feedback form that you can fill out, and we would love to hear your horror stories or any fun stories related to cosplay.
Yes. We also have a Facebook group. There's Cosplay Stitch and Seam, the Facebook page, and there's Cosplay Stitch and Seam, the Facebook group. Our group is it's getting close to 500 people strong.
We're almost there.
So close. But there's a lot of people with great advice. There's you can show off your new costumes. You can talk about your next project. And we always do Work in Progress Wednesdays if you want to share where you're at. Or if you just want to follow the news and announcements and new episodes, you can just follow our Facebook page. Anything else?
I think that's it. I think that's good.
I think we got it? Okay. All right. So I'm going to introduce our guests real quick and then mostly let them introduce themselves. So today we have Isaiah and Darius, and I'll start with Isaiah.
Hi, I'm Isaiah. I'm a non-binary guy and 26 years old, and I've been cosplaying for about a decade now.
Nice. And Darius?
I go by Narwhals and Jars. And I've been cosplaying since '07. I only recently-ish started actually sewing my own costumes about 5 years ago. And I started competing this year.
Awesome. That's really cool.
It's been terrifying.
But you're doing it, and that's what matters.
Doing it, yes. I got over that hurdle of the fear of, the last 7 years of, should I?
Am I good enough?
I don't know. That's how I feel usually after Bonsai of I'm going to compete.
Exactly.
And then I think,
I just barely competed at KomoriCon last month, and I was still I'm going to compete. Oh, no. oh, no. So you guys kind of nailed it with the giving me your spiel with the background and everything, because my next question. Sorry, I did this earlier and I did fine.
What is your next costume?
I don't even know. My next question was going to be how long you've been cosplaying and a little bit about yourselves, which you kind of did already. Tell me your next costumes.
God, I'm working on White Wolf Bucky Barnes, which is a lot of seams, and I hate it.
Oh, gosh. So right now I'm actually working on Gen from Dr. Stone.
Ooh, okay.
Because he's very extra, so I love him.
I haven't seen that yet, but they've been pushing that one really hard. Is it a good title?
I still don't know exactly how I feel about it. I watch it religiously, but at the same time, I'm just this guy looks like a green onion. I can't take this seriously.
Thank you. Because normally when I'm on Facebook scrolling through it, I don't have my sound on. So I just see this guy, this ridiculous guy, and he's got evil villain look on his face.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
I mean, I'm not going to judge. I watch JoJo's.
Yeah,
so.
you really do. I mean,
All right. And then you guys kind of mentioned how you identify, but do you guys want to expand on that for our beginners and what that means to you?
So as a non-binary guy, I don't identify strictly as male or woman. I just kind of somewhere in the ether.
That was the word I was exactly thinking of, ether.
It's a weird spectrum of things, and I'm just more masculine than feminine. been a lot of fun. It's been expensive and a lot of paperwork. The paperwork is all the worst part of transitioning. Do not at me.
Oh God. It is a struggle though. It really is. So I actually identify as a trans guy. So I'm completely like flipping to the other side of I don't really like to think of it as a binary. It's definitely more of a spectrum for sure. But I also kind of like consider my personality itself a little more on the almost like a gender side. Like when I told my dad, he just kind of looked at me and was like, well, you really don't actually have much of a gender, do you? I was like, I don't know.
I mean, that's kind of endearing.
It's kind of, I mean, he was trying.
He's got the spirit.
But
he does.
So with this idea that you guys are both kind of in this area of transition, so we'll just call it transition, as you are making a change in your life. When it comes down to it, like, has this changed your perspective of the world around you? Or, I mean, obviously this is something that maybe you have changed your look on yourself, or maybe this is coming to that, you're making the outside appearance match what you feel should be there. Like, how does this change your opinion of the world around you and yourself?
It's kind of made me more aware of how, like, we gender really weird things for no reason. Like,
yeah.
I was shopping I have a new niece, and I was looking at kids' clothes, and I was like, oh yeah, let's get her this, like, red Snoopy sweater. And I'm like, oh, but it's from the boys section. I'm like, it's a red Snoopy sweater. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, she's not even a year old. She doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's true. It's really true. Like, the gendering of colors is just, to me, one of like the silliest things. It's like, how can we assign a gender to a color? I don't know. It's like, whatever. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But as far as like maybe like perspectives, I feel like people who fall within, under the term trans, because it's, a very wide umbrella term. I feel like a lot of us do have a very different experience from most people, because I lived as a woman for 20 years, so you get used to being treated a very specific way. Like, you get really used to people opening doors for you and being a little more gentle with you, per se. And then, like, when I started transitioning and really started being perceived more as a guy, like, that kind of went away. And especially with like men having conversations with me, they got a lot different, just because it's men talk to men differently than men talk to women. And like, I didn't actually really think about that a lot until I encountered it myself. So that's kind of, I feel like the way that other people treat you based on your gender is very interesting, really.
I will admit that I make more fart jokes at work than I do with my wife. Like,
fair point.
And like, that's probably something that you come and like, wow, men are really gross when they want to be, And it's not even just like, oh man, you're a pig. It's like, oh man, that's just stupid, gross humor.
It's true.
No, thank you.
Let's see. So in your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions about gender?
A lot of people seem to have not made the leap that gender and sex are two separate things. I don't think I had a college sociology class that was like, oh yeah, like, and I came out to my sociology class at like 9 a.m. on a Tuesday because I was tired, and I was like, yeah, sure, let's put this out there to this group of strangers. I have no filter. So, and then, my professor's like, oh, so you mean like I would pull down your pants and I would see nothing there? And I'm like, that's not what this means. And he's like,
oh my gosh.
And it's good, you do know the difference. And I'm like, we're going to talk about that in like 2 chapters. And I'm like, maybe you could have not said that.
Said that in a much more, I don't know,
a gentle
sensitive way? Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
no. So my mom works at that college. So he's like, oh yeah, I can give you a lot of crap because I know your mom. So, and I'm like, maybe don't.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I have college horror stories and not so much cosplay horror stories.
Oh, no.
That sounds like college.
Ooh, big oof.
Oh no. Kind of going a little off of what Isaiah said, I feel like a lot of people also immediately connect your gender to your sexuality. Like,
Oh, yeah.
when I started coming out, like, suddenly everyone thought, okay, so, well, you've been saying that, you're straight all this time, so are you still the same? I was like, I don't know. And then, like, at that time, like, I also kind of started thinking I was ace as well, so it was like, right now I just don't like anybody. And so that I feel like is kind of a weird thing. It's like just changing your gender has nothing to do with who you're attracted to. They're very, very different things, and they're not connected whatsoever.
For our audience who doesn't understand the term ace,
Oops.
can you?
Sorry. Yes. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. I just want to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible, because this is the opportunity where we get to open doors, right? Where we are allowing other people to ask those questions and be and allow themselves to be uncomfortable and not know. And so by giving them that information, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of explain what that ace was for you.
No problem. So ace is short for asexual, and I'm not sure if I'm actually the best person to provide this definition,
but again, for you, what was the experience? Yeah.
I guess in my terms, it's more or less a person who either doesn't really feel a sexual attraction towards people or doesn't have an interest in sexual relationships. So I'm hoping that I'm right with that. I mean, I was introduced to the term 10 years ago, so I don't know if it's kind of updated through the years.
It's still about the same.
It. Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I was being super archaic.
But that was
you're
still your experience, and that's not something that we're gonna raise our noses to. Like, that's how you felt. That's how you defined, and that's kind of the great thing about even this gender norm idea is that how is it that you define? And so allowing yourself to I was ace. That's how I defined myself. Congratulations, honey, that's you. Regardless, if I wanted to call myself Captain Underpants and walk around the house saying, all right, everyone has to refer to me as Captain Underpants, that's how I'm defining, right? Not to try and make a joke of it, but legitimately, that's kind of what it comes down to, is this is what I feel comfortable as. So
fair point.
Thank you for expanding on that. I appreciate that a lot.
In our other session, one of the things we talked about was like you guys mentioned, gender being a spectrum and sexuality as well, and people feeling like they have to be one thing or another thing, and that it can't be anywhere in the middle. Any thoughts on that?
I fell into that trap really early in my transition. I was like, oh God, I'm a man, I have to do all these things. And then I kind of grew more comfortable with myself. And I was like, I think I was probably wrong about that. I'm going to keep the things that I like and just kind of throw away all this traditional stereotypes of what it means to be a man, and just maybe not even be a man at all anymore.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that for sure. Even though I consider myself not really in the non-binary spectrum of things. When it comes down to things that I like, my personality, my interests, I don't really care about those gender labels very much. If I see something I'm gonna sound crazy, I'm obsessed with notebooks. And if I see a cute notebook at a store that has a fuzzy fox on it, and I'm I don't care if most men wouldn't buy this, I like it, I'm gonna buy it.
I was walking to the train the other day, and this cat walked in front of me, and I have my headphones in, I'm listening to music, and I loudly go, "Kitty!" And as I'm watching it turn, and I turn my head, and I had my hood up, and I see this guy in my peripheral vision kind of giving me that side eye of you're freaking weird, dude. But at the same time, it's unabashedly myself. I got excited. There was a cat. I love cats. So
why wouldn't you get excited over that?
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. One of the other things actually that you mentioned, Darius, was that you thought you were at one time ace, is that people don't realize that that's something that can change, that your feelings and that things can change, or where you fall on the spectrum, you may find that this label fits you better, this one fits you less well. What do you feel about that?
I definitely feel yes, over time, where you kind of fall can certainly shift and change. I feel it's a very fluid thing for sure. I've been all over the spectrum of sexuality, and at one point I thought I was straight, and then I thought I was bi, then I thought I was gay, then I thought I was ace. It was I just went all over the place. And actually, one kind of funny thing that I've noticed just within the trans community, specifically with, again, this might be a slightly archaic term, but FTM, which is a female to male, is that it seems like a lot of us start out, when we are identifying as women, when we think we're women, we oftentimes are straight. And then like after that transition, it kind of seems like a lot of us actually go more towards the being gay part of things, which is kind of weird. It's just kind of something I've noticed like through talking to other FTMs. So that I felt like was always kind of strange or interesting. A lot of us always had like a very small lesbian period, which I don't understand how you go from being a lesbian to a gay man, but a lot of us have. So it just happens. I don't know.
So with that idea of like you're going through these, for lack of a better term, phases of like, this is where I'm at today, and this is where I'm at yesterday, and this is where I'm at tomorrow. I had the question ready and up for it.
You're slacking, man. You
I
gotta
know.
get on that.
I know. What advice would you give to somebody who might be questioning their gender or their gender identity?
It's okay to experiment with it. Like you can always change your mind if it doesn't work. It doesn't have to be set in stone. You can always, like, if it doesn't work, you can say, you know what, I'm just going to go back, and that's fine. It doesn't make it invalid. It's, it just is.
I think people get this idea where they feel like their label has to be set in stone and they aren't allowed to explore and find themselves better. And it's really unfortunate. Like that's one of the things like that I wish I had been told when I was younger, is that it's okay to like explore.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of grew up in the queer community. My mom's a lesbian, so I kind of grew up around the Pride Center. I met my first drag queen when I was 8 years old. So I kind of was always vaguely aware that all this existed. But even for me, like, it took me forever to put the pieces together. I'm like, oh, maybe I am too. Maybe it's not just like something I'm associated with since childhood. So it's also okay to figure it out way late.
Yeah.
I forgot the question. I'm sorry.
What advice would you give to somebody who is maybe questioning gender or their gender identity?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I would, just kind of going off of what Isaiah said too, is that a lot of it, I think, take the time to experiment. Don't necessarily rush into it and feel like you have some kind of obligatory deadline of, I need to know exactly how I identify by next week or whatever. Like that shouldn't be the case. Is take your time, figure it out. It took me a couple of years to figure out that I was trans, mostly because at that time, like this was around, I want to say like 08 or 09. So the trans community wasn't talked about as much. It was getting better than it was like, say, in the 90s, but a lot of that vocabulary just did not exist for a lot of people. Like, I had no idea what it was. Like, my knowledge of the trans community back at that time was, again, super archaic terminology here, but I was really only aware of transvestites. And I mean, that's not like a word that you use anymore, really, because it's now considered offensive, but that's all I knew about was like, I thought the trans people were only men who wore dresses, but it's so much more than that. And it's a lot of it is just you really need to take the time and just kind of feel what feels right for you, even if that means, like, as silly as it sounds, one thing that kind of clicked for me was even just like starting to identify as a male online, because people would interact with me as if I was just a regular guy. And so that actually kind of helped me a little bit realize, oh, this feels better. I like this better. So
very cool. Yeah, we actually mentioned in the other one that like it can just changing your pronouns and things in your bio and stuff online can have a really marked difference in how you feel. Yep. So that's really cool. Let's see. So shifting gears a little bit to talk about cosplay now as a tangent. So cosplay lets us take on a lot of different roles. You can kind of like play around with sex, gender, age, species, and give us new perspectives. Do you think cosplay has helped you understand gender better? And if so, how?
So it's interesting because I didn't really realize I was trans until I started cosplaying. Like, I mostly cosplayed as men, and I was like, oh, this feels a lot more comfortable. Like, that's kind of what I want to do. So it made me think, oh, this is something I can kind of play around with, and it's a safer environment, I guess I could say, than a lot of other, like, just in public. Because you're around other kind of similar like-minded people who aren't gonna throw a rock at you.
Sure.
That's true. So I, going more into the cosplay side of things, cosplay was actually kind of the catalyst for what helped me realized that I felt a little bit different than most of the other people that I knew. I also cosplayed a lot of men as well early out, but in the beginning I didn't bind, which for people who are not aware of that terminology, that is when you use something to compress the breasts to make more of a flat chest or like a more masculine shaped chest. And I cosplayed as Zach Fair once, and that was the first year I binded, and like that was like the moment I realized it was like, ooh, I like this. Like I like being treated this way better. I like those masculine pronouns. And then like from there, I kind of just started doing research online, but it was really that experience of cosplaying and being treated a different way that really helped me.
So, like, when you say it was treated, would you say, like, the cosplay community was, like, kind of there behind you or had your back? Or like, how do you feel like the cosplay community has helped with your gender identity or hindered or any?
Well, I would say they definitely really only helped. I haven't had any bad experiences based around cosplay, specifically around my gender, just because, kind of like Isaiah said again, like, I'm just stealing everything you say.
Don't worry about it. It's because I'm talking first most of the time. So,
but I like you talking first. I don't want to go first. But oh no, I forgot what I was saying.
I do that all the time.
Your train of thought took a wrong turn somewhere.
Don't worry, I'm amazing at editing.
Make me sound amazing. Thank you.
It's hard to change perfection.
Oh no.
I was going to say, one of the things I noticed and kind of mentioned in the earlier episode was that it's really interesting. You can have a conversation on gender, sexuality, and whatnot within the cosplay community, and then you step outside to like a more a different space, let's say, and the reactions you get are very, very different. How would you say that conventions, cosplay in general, feel like a safer space to, be yourself?
I would say yes.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
I totally agree. Just because a lot of times you're not the only person experimenting with those things. And the cosplay community in general seems to have a lot more people who are willing to experiment with that, because we have these love of these characters who might not always match up with the gender that we identify as or whatever. And so it really gives you that freedom to, I'm a dude. I really like this girl. I'm going to dress up as them because I appreciate the character so much. And a lot of other people are doing very similar things. So it definitely does feel a lot safer in that regards than, just the general public where you might get, stoned to death over something like that.
So why do you feel that talking about gender, especially in the cosplay community, is so important?
I think because even though it is safer, there's still a lot of misconception out there. And it's still really harmful and dangerous even within these safer communities. And it helps to talk and put it out there a little more so that there's more understanding and we don't have as much of that awfulness happening in response.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Just because it's safer doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% safe all the time. So there definitely are still people who might shun you because of the way that you identify. And the only way to get past things like that is to talk about that and keep an open discussion there.
Yeah, no.
So this kind of relates, how you said that people are becoming a little bit more aware. They're making a conscious effort to be less ignorant about certain topics. How do you feel like we as a community can make changes or be more sensitive? Like, are there things we should be pushing for at conventions? Is there things like we can do individually?
One of the examples last time was like gender bathrooms. Like,
please, everywhere. I'm so tired of because I don't strictly pass as anything, and I never have. So no matter where I go, I feel uncomfortable, but I can't tell if the people around me are uncomfortable with me there.
Yeah, because
I'm just so ambiguous.
Right. And, like, I can only imagine, like, for J-Heart, if you've ever seen their stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic, large ball gowns. Still appears more male sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I can only imagine the giant ball gown walking into the men's restroom, right?
Yeah, that's an awkward experience, yes.
Yeah. I've noticed some more conventions are having, like, an all-genders bathroom or, like, a gender-neutral bathroom.
Like a family bathroom?
Or, like, yeah. Are there other changes that could be made, though, that can be more welcoming? I've noticed, like, people have, like, the lanyards with different, like, their identifiers on them.
Yes, honestly, that is so nice. Or even just having lanyards where, like, some conventions, you have to have your legal name on it, and they don't give you an opportunity to write your own name, which it sounds like such a little thing, but it can be such a big thing. Like, it makes me so sad when, like, you know, my legal name is still stuck on it because I don't have money like Isaiah does to change my name legally.
It's because I live with my parents and I don't have a lot of bills right now.
Fair point. But because it's so expensive. But that really, I feel like that alone is a big step for the conventions who have done that.
Very cool. I was going to say something. Like, would it help to have, like, more panels, to have more discussion, like, at the convention itself? Or would it be, like, is it better for people to, like, seek out their own education? Like, what do you think would be helpful?
I feel like it's a little bit of both, because I know I've seen some discussion where people get really annoyed that the panels exist because they're like, oh, you're pushing it down our throats, when that's not really the case. So I feel like we also need to push back against that as well.
For sure.
Would it be also good to have, like, possibly a safe space and like maybe it's just like a room where, like, there's security or just somebody who is on staff, just like, hey, we don't tolerate that, that's against our policies, you can come in here, like, sit down for a few minutes, have a hot chocolate or coffee or something.
That, I think, would also be a really great step for sure. So that would be really cool to have something like that available.
Nice. Very cool. Let's see. Guys, like, breeze through these questions.
Yeah, you guys are doing.
Was there anything we missed that you guys want to add, or?
I guess on a more personal note, as far as, like, what can be done to be, like, more understanding. And granted, I mean, no one person talks for the whole trans community, mind you, but I feel like to people who maybe don't interact with us very much, like, the most important thing you can do is ask questions, but do it in a respectful manner. Like, don't just, like, ask someone how they identify at, like, the Christmas dinner table. Like, that, no, don't do that, please.
Read
Very
the room
awkward.
a little.
Yes, exactly. Like, be aware of your surroundings. Like, if you have questions, like, nicely approach someone and be like, hey, would you mind if we had a discussion later? You know, pull them aside so you can be, like, in a private area where there's not a lot of other people hearing over you, and, you know, ask politely. Because for me specifically, one of the worst things is people assuming things about the trans community. It's always better to actually get an answer from someone who's living in this reality so that you are educated, instead of just guessing and assuming and not knowing how things actually work on our side, per se. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So to sum it up, there's a conversation that can be made, doesn't necessarily need to be in front of everybody, and it can even be scheduled of, like, hey, I'd love to ask you more questions. Can we plan a lunch date?
Exactly.
Or get coffee, and I might ask some really ignorant questions. But that is, again, that's the opportunity for someone to be uncomfortable with the lack of knowledge that they have.
Exactly, for sure. And I mean, granted, again, I can only speak for myself, but it seems like a lot of people in the trans community are willing to answer those questions as long as you're delicate about it.
As long as you're not like my sociology professor.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't be like that.
Don't be that guy.
No.
Yeah.
Please don't ask to, like, look. Because that's
Please,
terrible.
that is the worst thing you can do. Like, do not ask about what's in someone's pants or under their clothes. For the love of God, we do not want to think about it.
Why does it matter? Like
doesn't.
that's the
That's
big
the
thing.
thing.
Is like
It doesn't.
It
But for
shouldn't
some
matter.
reason, like, they want to know anyways, and I'm like, I don't want to tell you because it's not your business.
And then it almost becomes a spite thing of
Yeah, like, well,
you-
because you're going to be, like,
'cause you're
rude
being a
about it, I'm
jerk
not going
about
to
it,
tell
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm going to make up lies. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's like I have, like, 3 quarters and some lint. That's what I got.
One of the biggest concerns we had from cis folks was, like, misgendering, like accidentally misgendering a friend, or, like, being too afraid to ask pronouns. What are your thoughts on that?
So messing up does happen, but like don't make a big deal when you mess up. Just like correct yourself quickly and move on. Like do not like, oh, I'm so sorry. I meant to, like, it was a mistake. Like you're just drawing more attention to the mistake you made and you're making it worse.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't make it a spectacle. Just correct yourself quickly and move on. I think a lot of people who are trans, or, you know, me specifically anyway, like I try to be pretty understanding of people who accidentally misgender, because you learn very quickly who is misgendering you on accident and who is misgendering you in a malicious way. Like my parents, for example, even though I've been transitioning for about 10 years now, they still have their moments where they accidentally call me by my birth name or use, you know, the wrong pronoun, but they also knew me as their daughter and as this specific name for 20 years. So it's like you also have to kind of cut people slack in that regards.
Yeah.
So
my wife has for the past little while been using sie, zer, them pronouns.
Okay.
And that one's a little bit trickier because like
Neopronouns, like, because they're not used as much, they tend to get a little trickier.
Exactly. And even my wife will say, well, I just misgendered myself, so...
Oh, yeah, I did that all the time.
You
like,
know.
oh, yeah, I myself, I'm doing the wrong thing.
So, like, the point that I really want to emphasize is, like, if you screw it up, own it, apologize, and then move on. And, like, it's not the end of the world, because, like you said, Darius, there's 20 years of habit behind you. But at the same time, by making a big deal out of it, like you said, Isaiah, it's one of those things that if you're making a big deal out of it, you're drawing more attention to something that doesn't need to. It's a slip up. It's an accident. You can't cry over spilt milk. It happened. You got to move on.
What advice would you have, say, for people who want to learn more, who want to make fewer mistakes and kind of educate themselves? What are some good resources?
I'm trying to think of resources, because I stopped looking this up a while back.
same.
We're too old.
Oh no.
Do you have any podcasts that you may have listened to, or?
I just don't want people to feel like we're telling them that like your trans friend is your like only resource and you have to like grill them for questions on how to
do that,
act.
by the way. That is terrible. Like you are going to make your friend really uncomfortable with that.
Mm-hmm. We're not encyclopedias. Most of us can answer questions, but not all the time. Not all the time. Probably the first one that really comes to mind, because I haven't, looked up this stuff for years, is, I mean, if nothing else, if your area has a local pride center, they alone can be a really good resource. They usually have people who, of course, are involved in the LGBTQ plus community in various ways, and they are usually more than welcome to be a resource for you as well. So, I mean, your average trans person is not an encyclopedia, but if you have a volunteer who's working at a place like that, they're a little more, welcome to actually answering those questions and concerns and things like that.
They're a little more helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
We've told our listeners to approach it the same way they would cosplay, and that's you never stop learning.
Yes.
Like, you don't stop learning skills, you don't stop learning new ideas, and it's the same, like living as a human being. You don't really stop learning, and if you shut down, you're just going to close yourself off from a lot of new experiences and meeting new people.
So on that same idea of like, what does, where does someone go to get more information? So let's say you have that friend and they're like, I need to learn more. I'm very ignorant on the subject and I just need to learn more. They are learning more. What does a ally look like in those moments? What does some, and it could be just a little thing, like someone just saying, oh, by the way, their pronoun is now they, them, just FYI. Like, is it little moments like that? Because in my personal opinion, and this is like my one soapbox that I'm going to get on for this, is normally I paint my nails. Today I took them off because I was working with chemicals. And my mother asked me on Thanksgiving, why do you have your fingernails painted, David? And I do that because purely I am in a position where I can challenge the norm of what other people are expecting. Travis McElroy does something similar. He does eyeliner, he dyes his hair fun colors, and he is in a position where he is safe to challenge those norms. And so by me doing this, I open up the opportunity for other people who don't feel as safe to do that. So I tried to explain that to my mother, but my mother was very, very close-minded. And the other answer that was in the back of my head that I'm never going to say to my mother was, because you're still asking that question. right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm never going to say that to my mother.
Right.
I mean, you could.
I
but
could.
You might get disowned.
There's been worse things. But like that's in my purview. That's how I'm trying to be the best ally that I can be. I know that I'm gonna make screw ups and that I'm gonna make pronoun mistakes and I'm gonna probably say something ignorant once or twice because it's not the world that I live in every day. But I want to make sure that I am the good ally that I can be. So what's like a good example that, or maybe an experience that you've had?
So going back to the pronouns thing, it helps if like non-trans people also put their pronouns in like their bios and in their email footers. I see that a lot in like cis women who do that a lot because it's a little safer. But I don't see as many like cis men who like, oh yeah, these are my pronouns. Like even if they're just he, him. Because then it is less obvious when I do it.
Yeah.
I don't really have an answer for this one.
That's fine. That's fine.
Oh gosh, I had a question. As far as, because I feel like it's a lot more prevalent, like you said, with cis women. But the topic of crossplay, is there a way that we can be more sensitive when doing crossplay, at least using like gender identifiers, things like that? Or like, is it just something to not worry about? Like, I've heard some people even say that crossplay is like an outdated word and we should update to something else.
I haven't heard that it was an outdated term. I don't think it's as big of a deal because I view it in the same kind of vein as like drag, which also has a lot of issues in it. But that's a different soapbox for my blog or something.
You want to start a new podcast? I'll happily help out.
Sure, we'll do a podcast on me complaining about RuPaul's Drag Race.
Oh gosh. I agree with Isaiah, though. I haven't actually heard of crossplaying being considered an outdated term. That's actually primarily what I do with my costumes is crossplay. Mostly because I really just hate making pants.
Here's what I've learned. If you do a button fly instead of a zipper, it's so much easier. Do that instead.
Probably that would be easier.
Yeah, that's what I did with my pants for Bucky. I was like, I don't want to install this zipper. I'm just going to do buttons and it's fine. My hands are clean. Pro tip. If you don't like zippers, just use buttons.
Perfect.
Well, I think that was all the questions we had.
Yeah, that's more than the questions that we asked last time. So,
we always like to end our episode though on a cosplay, either horror or hopeful story. Is there one that either of you would like to share?
So I did my first competition this year.
Yay!
I was the only one in my class, so it didn't really matter.
Oh,
but it was so nice. Everyone was so sweet and so kind. And I was standing there. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm weighed down with all the scale mail and I kind of want to cry because I've never done this before. But everyone was so sweet about it. And I just love that.
that's awesome. That is really cool.
Just standing there in my fake eyelashes like, I don't know if I applied this right.
Oh my God.
I've never done this before. Oh
Can
my
never
God.
tell if they're still on. Is it coming off?
I know they're still on. I just don't know if they're on right.
Oh,
That's
fair.
Oh gosh. So I do kind of have one. So this was like way back when Bonsai was still at the Sheraton and I was still just itty bitty little baby cosplayer. It was, I think, during the formal. If it was the formal, no one was like monitoring dress code though because I was in pajamas.
Do they still? I don't think they really monitor it even now. I don't think anyone pays attention that much.
I don't really think so. I don't know. I'm not sure. I usually don't go to it because I have no coordination.
That's my sole reason for going. I only go to Bonsai for the formal.
That works. And I have like super high anxiety, and one of my friends didn't know this, so she grabbed me to like whisk me out onto the dance floor, and I just immediately crumbled to the ground and start hysterically crying.
No.
And this guy comes up in a Jiraiya costume and is like trying to calm me down and is like, hey, well, do you want to dance with me instead? And like, I was still like panicking and freaking out. So it was just kind of like, okay. And so I go with him and like, we do that stupid little high schooler thing where you just like spin and sway in a circle.
The little sidestep thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that horrible thing. And then eventually like he asks to kiss me and I'm scared and I'm like,
Oh, no.
you're like
No.
so much bigger than I am and I'm
Oh.
just little and you're asking this really weird thing and I'm like, okay,
Oh,
because I don't
no.
really know what else
Because
to do.
you don't know how to say no.
And exactly, because I'm
Yep.
too nice, which most people would argue. But so that happens, and then like for the rest of the weekend, he like immediately thinks we're like a thing, and is like
no.
tracking me throughout the whole con. And I tell my friends, and like they just like form this little circle around me every time they see the Jiraiya. Thank God he was in the same costume the whole time. They would just like grab me and like shove me onto the ground in between like this circle of my friends, and I would just like hide and wait until I left the room.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was
That's horrifying. Yeah, that's scary.
It was scary.
I'm
I
so
would have burst
sorry.
into tears.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
That is terrifying.
I have
Jiraiya
a
cosplayers still scare me to this
I
day.
mean, that's fair.
yeah, leave a bad taste in your mouth, I'm sure.
Literally.
Oh
no.
I have one from one of our listeners. Is it cool if I read?
yeah, by all means.
So this one comes from D. Kaufman. Just says, "Hello, I have a cosplay horror story, but thankfully it has a happy ending. So
Yay.
and on a happy note. For a solid week, I had been crunching my life away trying to get Sora from Kingdom Hearts 3 and Haruka from Sailor Moon done for Anime Fest this past August. I still wasn't done the morning we had to leave, so I packed everything up and took it with me. Both of these were to be for the main and hall cosplay contests, and it was my first time entering a medium-large con, so it was a really big deal for me. Fast forward to the con hotel where unpacking my oversized prop, which was Sora's storm flag, made it mostly safely, with a few bumps from the bellhop guy.
Oh no.
I have everything spread out and ready to go, and I'm about an hour into the real con crunch when one of my sisters asks me if I have my Sora pirate coat. I look around, empty out my entire suitcase, and it's not in there. We just stared at each other in abject horror. The coat is one of the most important parts, and the thing I put the most work into, about 32 hours. So for a solid hour, we weighed out the best way to get the coat to the convention. Thankfully, my sister's husband works for Southwest, so she flies for free. At 8 p.m., I dropped her off at the airport. She spent the next few hours finishing details on Sora, and by 7 a.m. the next morning, she was back at the hotel with my coat. I can never thank her enough, and I was ready to get judged by 9:30. In the end, I successfully walked across that stage with only a minor hiccup maneuvering the 10-foot flag, and ended up taking home best prop.
That is
nice.
fantastic.
That's so good. I love that story.
That's so good. It's like when Mercedes forgot all of her chiffon
that
at
was
NDK,
good. Oh,
and they had to
man.
overnight. Yeah, we were driving to NDK and just like obscenities. I forgot my chiffon. It's 90% of the costume. But it's fantastic to hear that like those are like those moments when you really know the value of people in your life and where their value is for you.
Definitely.
Because I don't know many people who I would get on multiple flights to try and get a jacket
goodness.
for a small little competition.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So yeah, if you guys would like to share your own cosplay horror stories or hopeful stories, inspiring stories, or just ideas for another podcast that you'd like us to use your topic for, go ahead and send that to us at cosplaystitchandseam@gmail.com or
you can go to our website, cosplaystitchandseam.com, and fill out our little user feedback, and we would love to hear all that you have to say.
Very cool. Like, thanks so much. I forgot to do this in our last episode, but our music is by Macy Roberts, and our audio editing
It's by me, David Jeffress of Comic Trades Monthly and Dungeons and Chill. Last month we read the Star Wars Boba Fett Dies and the Star Wars. And I'm not being cute. Like you think, oh, it's the Nintendos, the Legos. You know, it's legitimately called The Star Wars. And it's based off of George Lucas's very first draft for the Star Wars movies.
Wow.
It's a read. It's a read.
Is it a good read?
It's a read.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much for being on our
thank
show. Thank you for informing us a little more and helping us hopefully make gender a more accessible topic to everyone in the community. Any last minute thoughts?
Would you like to plug your social media?
Sure, let's do that. I mostly am on Instagram at Narwhals and Jars. Right now it's not very active because I'm in the middle of moving, but maybe by the time this is out, I'll be active again. I also have a Facebook at the same name, but I don't use it. Ever.
I have no active social media, so let's just not. Let's leave my stuff alone.
Wonderful. We can do that.
Perfect.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.